Hey guys, I decided to just go live with this because this is a longer video and I don't want to make this any longer than it is, but I think it's important for anyone here in Harris County to see. So before I do, all views are my own. I do not give advice, so please think for yourself and decide for yourself. Not all content is appropriate for children, and thank you for joining me. This is the Commissioner's Court meeting, yes, Commissioner's Court meeting with Judge Hidalgo from October 20th. But I think it's important that everybody see this because this is the first time you can witness what's going on with uh, upcoming votes that are going to happen, and the person who's in charge of it is on here too as well. So please watch and listen. It is a little long, so if you can't watch it live right now, please feel free to come back later and watch it. But watch it and share with everybody because this is exactly what is happening in Harris County with our votes and what is upcoming. So be blessed, and here we go.
So it's 1:04 p.m. and I'd like to call the October 20th, 2022 meeting of the Harris County Elections Commission to order. To get started, would you please each announce your name and title for the record, and we'll start with Ms. Bennett.
Good afternoon. This is Ann Harris Bennett, Harris County Tax Assessor Collector.
Cindy Siegel, Chair of the Harris County Republican Party.
Lena Hidalgo, Harris County Judge.
Tanisha Hudspeth, Harris County Clerk.
Otis Evagaro, Chair of the Harris County Democratic Party.
So everybody's present. We have a quorum of more than 3 folks present in person, so we can begin the meeting. Do we have any public speakers this morning?
No, ma'am, we don't.
Okay, we'll move on to the discussion then. We only have one item on the agenda today. It's a request for discussion with the Harris County Elections Administrator regarding logistics and operations for the November 8th, 2022 elections. I know that our Administrator Tatum is here this morning, and Mr. Tatum will be discussing operational preparations ahead of the November elections. I know that he circulated a memo. Members, just want to make sure everybody has received his memo. And Mr. Tatum, I would like to ask you that you cover as part of your presentation. I suspect it would possibly be on there. Any steps you've taken to address what would have been sort of unforced errors in the March election, obviously under a different administrator, as well as the issues caused by the obstacles in the state law. In particular, what has been done to educate election workers on the new machines, voters on the length of the ballot in the new machines, what's been done to ensure the elections website can handle increased traffic, that there aren't issues or long lines and dropping off ballots. And most importantly, what is your expectation? I want to make sure that the public is aware of this. What is your expectation in this election in terms of the timing of results? Colleagues, is there anything that you all would like to make sure Mr. Tatum covers? And of course, we'll have an opportunity to ask questions as well, but.
Nothing further at this time.
Yeah, Administrator Tatum, I would love for you to cover also the open house that you did, cover some of the basics on that. I thought that was really well received. Folks on every single side of the aisle was very well informed. I thought that was really good, and I'd love for you to go over that so the public knows the good work that you did in that.
Go ahead, Administrator.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Judge Hidalgo, members of the Elections Commission. For the public, my name is Clifford Tatum. I'm the election administrator for Harris County. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to talk about Harris County election preparations for the November 8th, 2022 general election. First and foremost, the primary activities of the administrator's office is to continuously conduct voter registration, voter education, and outreach activities year-round, and any preparation for an election event. With that understanding, my testimony today will focus primarily on the election preparations beyond registration and outreach. I will mainly focus on preparations related to the November election, including ballot design, logic and accuracy testing, ballot by mail processing, polling place locations, vote centers, election judge recruitment, placement and training, early voting and election day preparations, election supply handouts, central count placement and operations, election night tabulation, and overall election security. The election administrative staff has taken into consideration feedback from the previous elections held in earlier 2022 and revised processes and procedures to remediate most, if not all, the issues encountered during the previous year. My preliminary focus has been to review the processes and procedures implemented by the staff in view of the outside findings offered by Forest Marsh audit to ensure we have addressed as many of those findings as possible within the limited period of time that we've had available to implement some of those changes. And what I've said to staff and what I've said to the public is that we can't make drastic changes to the elections process within a 90-day period of time. So we've identified the short-term implementations that we can implement for the process, and the long-term processes we'll have to tackle as we get beyond the November 2022 election. We have addressed many of the findings included in the audit report, except to the extent that they are long-term solutions, and I'd be happy to talk through what those are. I'm excited to be here in Harris County. I'm enjoying the hospitality of the Texas community, Harris County, and the city of Houston as a whole. The team I've joined are a dedicated group of election professionals who care deeply about the work that they do, and I'm honored to be a part of this team. I've highlighted for you in the report that I provided a separate section that identifies the Forest Marsh evaluations. And as we go through the presentation today, we'll talk about some of those activities, and I will endeavor to highlight those particular activities as it relates to the Forest Marsh findings. Election preparations began in earnest in late June, and that's when we received the nomination submissions from the political parties. We communicated in early July with the Harris County entities that wanted to add their contest to the November 2022 ballot. And after receiving notifications from the entities for access to the ballot, coding began for the design of the ballot itself. A total of 37 entities with a total of 47 single-member districts were added to our November ballot. As published, we provided our stakeholders with notice of the logic and accuracy testing that began on September the 16th and continued through September the 21st. We processed a total of 61,924 mail ballot packets during the week of October the 3rd through the 7th. We mailed out 1,154 Chinese and Vietnamese ballots during the same week. The EAO staff, election administrative staff, processed over 1,800 UOCAVA, Uniformed and Overseas Citizens Absentee Voting Act ballots before the deadline, which was September the 24th. And as of to date, we have processed 74,413 mail ballots. The Signature Verification Committee convened on October the 19th. We began pulling the tabs off of the return ballots. The voted ballots has been returned by the voters. And as of today, the Signature Verification Committee has started comparing signatures to the back of the envelopes to the voter registration system, comparing the ID numbers as well as the signatures themselves. The Central Count Board, the Early Voting Ballot Board will convene on October the 26th to open the ballots. And the Central Count Board will meet on Saturday, November 5 to begin early voting scans reconciliation. As you know, early voting runs from October the 24th through November the 4th. And we anticipate processing those results as early as possible after early voting ends. To date, we have completed all early voting, presiding, and alternate judge placements, except for one recent vacancy. There are a few early voting clerk positions to be filled, and we feel confident that we will have those vacancies filled by October the 24th.
How many? How many, Mr.
I
Tatum?
believe there were 5,
Okay, thank you.
but I'll verify that number. For election day judges, we have placed all but 20 presiding judges and 179 alternate judges. And we're working with both parties to secure additional names and to appoint those positions as we can. I think we've communicated to the parties that we've entered into what is called the emergency appointment process, but we're still working through with the parties to identify workers who can work in any particular location. What we're finding is that some workers aren't willing to drive from the southeast of Houston to the northeast of Houston and vice versa. So we're doing what we can to place those vacancies within what the names that the parties have provided to us. To date, we have trained over 2,000 individuals, and we'll meet our goal of training at least 4,000 to 5,000 by November the 7th. We have training scheduled every day of the week, including Sundays through November the 7th. To streamline and speed up the election night drop-off process, the staff has deployed 15 drop-off lanes at NRG, adding 3 tents per lane so that we can process 45 cars at one time. Through simulation, we have determined that we can process a single car drop-off within 5 to 7 minutes. So our team has done calculations to determine how long it would take us to actually process all 782 cars. And we're communicating to our election judges what we anticipate their wait time may be as they drive their results to NRG. We are predicting that the first results will arrive at NRG on election night between 8 and 9 p.m. Of course, as you know, the polls close at 7 p.m. But if voters are standing in line at 7 p.m., then those voters that are in line at 7 p.m. will have the opportunity to cast their ballot. And once that last person has cast their ballot, then the judge can close the polling place and begin the process for shutting the machines down, processing the paperwork, and then returning their results to the central count location. Early voting and ballot by mail results will be released at 7 p.m. on election night. And we will release the election day results as they return to central count on an hourly basis thereafter. For example, the first report will be reported at 7 p.m., which will be the early voting and the ballot by mail results. We anticipate the polling place closing at 7, 8 p.m. So the first results will be to us by 8:39. After we read several V drives into the system, we will report what will be the second report by 8 p.m. if there's results there. If there's no results, then we'll publish results at 9 p.m., 10 p.m., 11 p.m. until all results have arrived back to NRG. As of October the 19th, the total number of registered voters has reached 2.5 million. We are continuing to receive application boxes from the Secretary of State. And in fact, as we walked up today, there was a box waiting to go down to voter registration. So we anticipate all of voter registration being entered into the system by this Saturday so that those voters' names can be added into the poll books for early voting on the 24th. Early voting centers are being delivered as we speak, meaning the equipment and the supplies are being sent to those locations. We have 99 early voting locations spread throughout the county. And that equipment is being delivered, and we anticipate that equipment being set up between this Saturday through Sunday and Monday. There are certain locations that we aren't able to access on Sunday, so those will be set up on Monday morning. The Forest March activities, the Forest March evaluation that was provided to the county led us to consider several improvements to the process. And as I've indicated to you in the report that you have, as a result of the report, the team revised and revamped the educational process, the curriculum associated to how we train our judges. And that training is a tremendous, in my opinion, from trainings that I've seen, it's one of the top trainings that I've seen in the country. They revised the program to be more hands-on processing for the judges, as opposed to video and screenshots and the like. So the judges are now putting their hands on the equipment to actually set up the machines, to feel what the setup feels like. And then we're processing the paperwork on the back end so that they're able to see how the paperwork associates to the setting up of the machines and the operating of the machines. And we've received tremendous feedback from our judges about the curriculum itself. And we're pleased that the training is going well. We've revamped the training manual itself, in that we've added color coding sections into the manual so that the election judges can go specifically to a color coded section of the manual that describes the process that they should use as it relates to any part of the election process, from setting up the machines to interacting with our voters on election day. We've added a professional trainer to the training team, and he has been a tremendous help from what I'm gathering. The feedback that I'm getting from our election staff is that he's added a next level of training and educational experience to the process. So we're very excited about his joining the team and the results that we're seeing so far. The communications and outreach has engaged in a more robust voter education effort. That includes not only passing out voting election materials, but also taking the machines out into the public to allow the public to put their hands onto machines. And we're getting good feedback from the public as well. And I've included in the report there for you a section on communications and outreach itself. The communications team has retained a professional media agency to assist us in developing a marketing and media plan, which provides for communication services, not only in print publication, radio, TV, and broadcast. I think TV and broadcast are the same things. So they have provided a much needed, I think, as the team has advised, level of professionalism. Their ads have hit the newspaper, ads have hit the TV wave, the airwaves, the radio waves. And I believe also their postings that's been made in the metro, the buses and the trains. We've conducted quite a bit of earned media as well as paid media. I think, as I mentioned, we moved all election operations for early voting and election night reporting to NRG. And the central count station has been stationed at NRG so that election night drop-off will actually take place at NRG. There will be an early voting polling location at NRG from October the 24th through November the 4th. And there will be an election day polling location at NRG for election day. The election staff revamped our supply process so that most, if not all, of the materials that are leaving, that are being delivered to the judges, that are being picked up by the judges are scanned, if you will. There's a barcode added, so those materials are scanned out, showing that a judge picked up their particular scanner, ballot box, paper materials, election box itself, so that we know election materials were actually delivered to or picked up by the judges and delivered to the judges for early voting. And that same scanning process takes place as those materials come back to NRG on election night. The last 4 or 5 items that I just mentioned were activities that were taken in response to the Forest Marsh evaluation report itself. And I'll be more than happy to go into additional questions related to activities that we've conducted in response to the Forest Marsh report. But by and large, the activities that we've taken on were simply observations to improve the process, and they coincided with the Forest Marsh evaluation. There are other evaluations that the Forest Marsh offered, which relates to space, staff training, organizational management, organizational restructuring, and those are activities that I describe in the report to you as long-term resolutions, short-term, long-term, meaning that those weren't activities that we could embark upon in the first 90 days leading up to the election. So as we finish the November election, we'll look at implementing performance measures. We'll look at talking with the county administrator about identifying bigger space for the election administrator's office. The NRG arena footprint is a wonderful place to be for conducting an election. I'd like to make the request that we continue that through the duration. But we're, of course, subject to the budgets and the pressures of the county itself. So I'm willing and open to talking with our budget administrators and this commission and the court administration, the court commission itself, about how to move the elections forward, going forward in the process. We interact with the parties on a daily, weekly, more so than monthly now. As we're approaching the election process, we typically exchange emails and I dare say have telephone conversations with the parties on a daily basis as it relates to placing election judges, both presiding and alternate judges. We're communicating as it relates to which clerks are being assigned and where they're being assigned. And we're attempting to accommodate both of the parties' requests as it relates to placements of judges. As we've entered the emergency process, we are still endeavoring to interact with the parties to ensure that we're doing what the parties would like for us to do as it relates to placing individuals at different polling locations. But as we get closer and closer to election day, then we'll still cooperate and participate, but there's just limited time now. So we have to fill the seats as we're able to fill the seats. Madam Judge, that completes my open testimony to the commission. If you would, I'm here to answer any questions that you may have, and I'm open to your suggestions.
Thank you.
Judge, before we get to any questions, please talk about the open house.
Yes.
Because that was fantastic. And we've never done anything like that in the county from my knowledge. And I'd love for you to stress upon that open house that you invited folks to.
Yes, sir. So part of our thought process behind the open house was to educate our voters on what the elections process really looks like. It's not just an event for them to walk up on election day, cast a ballot, then walk away. So the election administrator and staff works on elections year round. So the idea behind the open house was to show the voters, here's what happens to your ballot after it's cast at an early vote center or a vote center on election day. So what the open house focused on was, we didn't show a car driving up, but it focused on the very first stop that the ballot makes, that the election materials makes when it's returned back to the election night processing center, to central count. And the first stop is actually a tent where the car is unloaded. And all of the materials that are unloaded by that judge are scanned into an e-poll book solution that allows us to identify that those materials came back from vote center number one. And the workers at that tent then escort those materials inside to NRG to what we call a receiving section. And each of those particular items that come in from the judge are then dropped off at different stations. And each of those items are accounted for as being returned to the election administrator's office. And what we focused on in the open house was the receiving section for the scanners and the V drives themselves. And that's really where the votes are. So as the scanner is received at the station for the scanners, the barcodes and the serial numbers are reviewed by the clerk. The clerk then confirms that the serial numbers are correct. The clerk cuts the seals off of the ballot bag and the scanner and opens the scanner. And inside the scanner, there are what we call the chain of custody documents. So the clerk then identifies that the serial numbers that were on the seals match the paperwork inside the scanner itself, so that we see that the seal that the judge put on the box matched the seal number that the judge wrote on the paperwork inside the scanner from the end of the process. So once the clerk identifies that the seals are correct, he then proceeds to determine whether all the paperwork has been completed, which includes the reconciliation form. They compare each of the scan devices will generate an elections result tape. They confirm that the elections result tape is there and that was also included on the paperwork. And once that is confirmed, The clerk then cuts open the compartment that maintains the V drive. The clerk then pulls the V drive out of the machine, verifies that the serial number on the V drive matches the paperwork, puts the paperwork and the V drive into what we call a clear cylinder bag. And that bag is then taken over to a certification table. From there, the certification table scans the V drive, scans the bag itself that indicates that that voting location has been received. And that clerk then walks the V drive into central count and hands that V drive over to, and the package over to the central count manager, the tabulation supervisor. The tabulation supervisor then confirms that the serial number matches and removes the serial number matches, removes the V drive from the pouch and inserts the V drive into the server to read the results. Once the results are read, the V drive is removed from the server and it is given to an assistant who then scans that V drive to show that the tabulation has actually processed that V drive. So that process itself tracks the V drive from the early vote location or the voting center location back to headquarters through the tabulation process. So what we see is that we're able to determine that we have tabulated every V drive that has been allocated out to a vote center. And the team has actually created an application that allows us to display to the public. They can see this displayed on our website of how many V drives, how many early vote centers, how many vote centers are returning their results to us on an hourly basis. So as those results are scanned into the system, the results display on the website, on the application itself. So as we see the results coming in, we know that we have 782 vote locations, and we'll see the votes received or the polling locations received. It should count itself up to 782. And if by the end of the night we see we're at 780 or 781, we know who we're looking for, which then allows us to identify where we need to go to find those results. And I skipped a step as it relates to the driver or the judge pulling up to drop off the materials. As the clerk is scanning in those materials at the drop off, if the clerk sees that there's materials that are missing, they direct that judge or driver over to another location where what we call reconciliation or resolution, I think is what it's called, where we then identify where did you come from, where's your materials. There's two options. If depending on the location of that vote center, we can then hotshot what we call a hotshot, send a tech out to that location to pick up that missing item, or we will ask the judge or the driver to go back and pick up the item. So there's a couple of different options there. So we've built in some fail safes to ensure that all election results that are out there are received into the NRG, into central count. And if by chance something is missing, we know where it is, we know what it is. It's then a matter of determining where it is and going out to retrieve it. The website performance, as I think, so to the public, Universal Services is our partner as it relates to our web services. And we work with Universal Services on a daily basis to ensure that our website is performing at its optimum level. And so in preparation for this election, we've had multiple conversations with Universal Services about what we anticipate the load is the technical terms that we use. How many users can actually access our website at any one particular time? And they've been doing what they call load balancing and load testing to ensure that we can accommodate thousands of users clicking on our website at one time. Are we likely to see 1,000 users at one time? More than likely not, but we know we'll have heavy traffic throughout the process. And so we feel comfortable with where we are with the website. But as I say that, every hacker in the nation now will attempt to penetrate the website, but they're prepared for that as well. As it relates to election expectations, as our team has spoken on a number of occasions to our outreach groups. This is the longest ballot in Texas. There's 93 contests. That's the smallest ballot in the county, 93 contests. And that includes federal contests, state contests, statewide contests, countywide contests, local contests, and entities, the local entities, MUDs, whatever entities having elections with us. So there's 93 screens that the voter will have to work through on election day. And we've calculated that if a voter is informed, it will take them from 3 to 5 minutes to vote a ballot. If the voter is uninformed, it's going to take that voter 7 to 10 minutes to to process their ballot. We have limited number of machines. We have 782 polling locations. We have 99 early vote centers. And let me say that the 99 early vote centers roll into 782 election day centers. We have allocated machines based on what we believe will be the 65% turnout. We have attempted to allocate those machines equitably to every commissioner precinct. And based on historical data as it relates to turnouts for certain locations, we can project what we believe the turnout will be for certain locations. It's a bit more nuanced as it relates to the newer locations that we're using for the very first time, but we still see we've looked at the population concentrations in every area of Harris County. So we've attempted to place a vote center and an election day vote center into those areas to accommodate the populations in those areas. And where we know that certain geographical locations like precinct 3 and precinct 4 doesn't have as many physical locations as precinct 1 or precinct 2. What we've attempted to do there is to accommodate by allocating more machines to those locations, to those precincts, as opposed to physical locations themselves. We've worked with all 4 commissioners in identifying early vote centers and vote centers themselves. We're utilizing, I believe, 72% of our locations are schools. The remainder are county buildings and some individual private facilities. We've entered into contractual agreements with our private facilities. And we have assessed each of those facilities for access according to the ADA standards. As you may recall, we are under a settlement agreement with the DOJ to ensure that all of our locations are actually ADA accessible. And as a result of that, some of our locations that we may have used in the past are no longer being used in this election. And we've socialized that with our commissioners and with our parties. And where we can accommodate, we will accommodate. Where we can't, we can't. And I think that's just part of the elections evolution in the process, even as it relates to judges and clerks. We understand our seasoned judges, and we understand the judges who are committed to the process and return time and time again. But one of the things that we're seeing as it relates to our judges is part of the judge's responsibility is to return the election results to election night drop-off. Well, a good number of our judges are getting beyond the point of where they're able to do that, but they still want to be judges, and we understand that. So what we've encouraged our judges to do is that if you can't drive, then hire someone on your team, one of your clerks who can drive, so that those results are driven back to NRG. And we've implemented, again, the driver program, so that if there are those judges who can't drive and they don't have anyone to actually designate to drive, then we actually have a team of drivers that are made up of county employees and law enforcement to go out and pick up those results. And of course, that leads to a different level of chain of custody as it relates to transferring the election equipment from the election judge to this driver to bring the results back. So there's chain of custody documentation associated to that. And we are training our judges on that. We're actually polling our judges every day to confirm that they're driving, to confirm that they want to pick up. But what we can't do is not hear from a judge as to whether or not they want pickup or not. We need to know one way or the other, and then we can make accommodations if there's accommodations to be made. As it relates to election night results tabulation and reporting, our team has assessed that it will take roughly 45 seconds to 1 minute to read each V drive into the server. And just by the sheer math, if it takes us 1 minute per V drive, that's 782 minutes. 782 minutes divided by 60 minutes is how many hours? So what we know we can do is read 2 V drives at one time. We're working on the opportunity, perhaps the ability to read 3 results at one time. But reading 2 results at one time cuts that 782 into 390. 390 divided by 60. The math lends itself to the fact that we won't have all of the results tabulated before midnight. So realistically, we're looking at best case scenario, 1:30, 2 o'clock, worst case scenario, 3 a.m. And our staff is working, gearing themselves up for that because we know we have to do that process. As you recall, the state has required us to tabulate all results within 24 hours of election day. So one of the things that we're doing there is one of the things I say to our staff is we must control the things that we can control. If we do it right the first time, there's not a redo. There's not a repeat, which means we're spending less energy. Because we know we're going to have to spend 24 hours on election night. So let's do the things that we know we can do up front so that we don't spend energy doing redos. So we've cut down on our redos. Are there some redos? Sure. I think everyone's aware that initially we contracted with a vendor to provide mail ballot services for us. And because our ballot went from 3 pages, 11 by 17, front and back, to a 4-page ballot, our vendor advised that they could not insert the 4th page, which then forced us to go out and find another vendor. We found that vendor. That vendor has produced our ballots and has mailed our ballots, and our voters are receiving those ballots. But that's a redo. All right? So we spend energy scrambling to make that happen. So as we visit polling locations and as we train judges and as we contact judges, if we're contacting the same judges 2, 3, 4, 5 times, that's a redo, which means our staff is spending just that much more energy to confirm judges that were supposed to be confirmed. So we can't control that. We have to call our judges. We have to assign and confirm our judges. But those are the things that we look at as it relates to preparing for an election. How do we minimize our errors? How do we perform more efficiently so that when we know we have to spend the time, we have the energy to spend the time? I'm open for any questions.
Thank you. Colleagues, do you have any questions for Mr. Tatum?
Yep. Mr. Tatum, who all was invited? Do you know to the open house? Do you have that readily available?
We broke the groups down into what we call stakeholders.
Okay.
So we had our internal stakeholders who are our court commissioners and staff, the party chairs and party representatives. We then invited in a separate group our advocacy groups and nonprofits that are involved in the elections process. And then we invited our media groups, the different media outlets, to come in to participate in the process. So each of the groups saw the very same process. They received the very same presentations. What we learned from the first group, we added as we answered their questions, we then added those responses, questions and responses into the process so that we gave the second group a fuller presentation based on the experiences of the first group. And then the third group, of course, got the best of all because we had everybody's questions at that point and built it into the process.
There was something you said, regarding the early vote locations and election day locations. So just to be clear, precincts 3 and 4, you make contingencies to allow for those precincts to have more machines because they have less locations.
Yes, yes, sir.
Okay. And then also you talked about getting to 65% turnout. That's what your model is based off of. How did you get to the 65% turnout or the estimated 65% turnout for election?
So we looked specifically at the turnout numbers from previous elections. We went back to the November 2018. We looked at the presidential 2016. We looked at the midterm, the presidential 2020. And then we looked at the primaries. And based on the turnouts that we saw there, the greatest turnout we saw was from the presidential, which was 75 to 80%. And we made an assumption that the midterm would not be as a bigger turnout as the presidential, but to build in a cushion, we, as opposed to going to the lowest end of the scale as it related to projections, we went to the higher end, which is 65 to 70%.
Okay.
And I believe as I'm thinking about the scale, I don't believe that we saw any particular turnout that was greater than 65% for a midterm. Now, but to that end, we then looked at the physical locations for some of the traditional polling locations. And we were able to see the turnout numbers at those particular locations, regardless of precinct, regardless of redistricting. We can see based on population centers where turnout is likely to occur. So for some of those locations, we could see that turnout might hit 70%. So we factor that in as well as it relates to equipment and as it relates to locations being added. And then, of course, we were limited by locations themselves. Who's available, who's not available, who's accessible, who's not accessible, who can give us the full 10 days for early voting, who can't give us the full 10 days, who can give us the biggest space. So we factor all that in as it relates to choosing locations.
And then my last question for right now is for chain of custody. So you talked about how our presiding and our alternate judges can opt into having someone picking up the equipment. Can you talk us through what that, number one, what that documentation looks like for them giving that approval, and then who is allowed to be able to drop off that election equipment to NRG?
So I don't have the chain of custody form with me directly, but there is a chain of custody form documentation that has to be completed between the judge and whomever the judge designates. Judge brings it themselves, and it's the chain of custody documentation that's in the scan. If the judge delegates it to someone, then there's a separate chain of custody form that has to be completed. That indicates the judge has delegated to a driver. It can be a clerk, or it could be one of the county staff that they sign off on that they're passing it on. And then that driver brings the information back to us.
And we're talking also about like constables as well too, who are part of that program.
I have to recall whether some of those drivers will be constables.
Okay.
I'll have to verify.
Law enforcement. Okay.
Law enforcement.
Any other questions, colleagues?
I can get this on. Thank you for your presentation. It was very thorough. And as someone who knows the nuances of a lot of this details, I don't think you could have gotten any more detailed in this report. So thank you for that. I did hear you mention that before early voting, there was about, correct me if I'm wrong on this, about 5 early voting or alternate positions that still needed to be filled. Yes. Clerks.
Clerks, not the presiding or the alternate judges, but clerks.
Okay, thank you. That is the only question that I have right now, but thank you for this very thorough report. That is all the questions that I have right now.
Yes, Chair Seaver.
Okay. Thank you, Judge. Thank you. And I have to tell you, I like the new website design. I
Yes.
think it's, at first we don't do change well. But once I figured it out, I was like, hey, this is good. Okay, some of my questions, Mr. Tatum, Otis and I were both on a call yesterday your weekly call that you had with our staff and your staff. And I know you had to leave, but in the Republican Party we're trying to schedule a follow-up because we had some more detailed questions. We didn't want Otis and his team to have to sit and listen to it. But let me just work through. So what I want to make sure I understand what the process was in this emergency period as it relates to early voting, which I think the same process would be followed with election day, filling judges and clerks who can't step in. So can you just walk me through, because both parties have submitted these names that have been approved and that we nominated, hopefully have been approved by the commissioners. And then those are the lists that you're supposed to work to make it like an early voting equitable between the two parties at a particular poll. So can you just walk through that again?
Yes, ma'am, I can. So as the parties know, they submit nominees to the clerk, to the election administrator, to then have those nominees passed on to the court commission to be approved. And so there's multiple lists that are submitted from the parties on on multiple occasions, I guess is the best way to describe it. So as we receive the list from the parties, we then submit those to the court for approval. So once the court gives us that approval, we then start placing those judges and alternate judges in correlation to a precinct breakdown based on party, party designation. And that party designation is based on the governor's race, who got the largest number of votes in the county. And as it relates to countywide voting, that percentage that broke down, I think, to 68% or 62% Democrat, 48 or 48, 62, something to that, 62, 48, something to that effect. So then what that means is that X number of polling locations has to have the presiding judge should be Republican and the alternate judge would be Democrat. And conversely, the same side. On Democrat is Democrat, alternate judge is.
And that's for election day, not early voting.
Yes.
Right.
So then from the early voting perspective, the parties provide us nominees for early voting as well. And then we place those nominees according to to the county breakdown. And then once we work through the names, the nominee names, if we need more names, we contacted the parties and said, hey, we need more names, send us more names. And both parties sent us more names. We then submitted those names back to the court for approval, with the understanding that the court would approve those names. And so then by agreement, we spoke to the parties to say, hey, as we're getting closer to the deadline here and the court is meeting on the court schedule, let's start placing these judges with the understanding the court is going to approve those judges. And once we get the judges placed, we then start placing the clerks. And my notes don't say specifically how we place the clerks, but as I recall it, the judge actually hires the clerk, at least for election day. I have to confirm that for early voting.
Yeah, and I mean, we can follow up on it. And I'm sort of putting you on the spot, and I don't mean to, I mean, let's face it, you've had a very short window to get up to speed. But I do want to follow up because I know that we submitted for early voting June 30th, over 600 names by polling location, because we did have those early voting tentative locations. And we just need to be clear that we understand the process, because we're concerned that we've felt like we have, with 3 different submissions, to beyond June 30th, that there should have been sufficient names and that there are people there are Democrats that are put in what should be Republican spots. And I don't know, Otis, you may have the same thing, vice versa. So we just need to clarify that.
Sure. And you're correct. Both parties submitted, I think, a tremendous number of names. And what we saw is that while there were a tremendous number of names, a good number of those folks indicated that they didn't want to work. And which meant we actually worked through those names a lot quicker than we thought. And to our dismay, it left us short, which is why we came back and said, hey, we need more names. And you both submitted more names. So as I think it's worth saying too, that as it relates to the geographical locations of some of these vote centers, some of the judges on both of your list didn't want to work in a particular area that wasn't in their neighborhood because we'd already, by seniority, as I understand it from previous past practice, the precinct judge gets the opportunity to be the presiding judge first. And if the precinct judge takes that location that may have been an existing historical judge location, then the question becomes, will that historical judge work somewhere else? And if that judge says no, then that's a name that's off the list. So there's a lot of that, and we'll be glad to walk through that
Okay.
and as much.
And we can do that in our follow-up.
Yes.
So you mentioned precinct 3 and 4, and I know precinct 3 has the most registered voters. And I've had judges that have been asking, one guy said he had 8 duos during the primary. And even then he had a huge turnout, and now he's down to 4 duos. Is there a process that they can report, that they can come back and sort of appeal for additional duos? And additionally, I would assume that you have a backup supply if machines go down, or if one poll all of a sudden has twice the number of voters, that you can quickly get machines out there to, make sure we cut down on the lines.
Yep.
I know that we had, for example, we had one poll, and I'm sure Otis, you had this similar situation, but we had one poll, 10 minutes till 7 in the primary, had 300 people waiting in line, and they didn't get out of there until 11. And I just think if you have a way it'll make the voters of both parties a lot happier.
And thank you. And thank you for that. I really want to, let's touch base after this, because I'm concerned that a judge thinks he only has 4 duos, because I'm not aware that anyone would have gotten that lower.
Well, and I may have the numbers wrong, but basically, I do believe he said that he had half the number. Then the judges have had a series of letters or emails from you all, and it relates to the drop off or pickup delivery of the ballots. And I think after our call yesterday, and you all had said that you would make sure that both parties' chairs are copied on any of these communications to our judges, clerks. But it seemed like we were saying that the county, I thought you'd said that the county was really, and I thought previous letters were encouraging the judges beyond the 10-mile, because you're saying if you're in 10 miles, too bad, you have to drive it in. But if you're beyond that you were trying to encourage them to get let you know so that a driver could come pick it up. And now it seemed like there was an email yesterday after our meeting that seemed like it almost flipped it, saying you didn't have enough drivers.
So
And this is being communicated to me. I haven't actually seen the email.
and I actually spoke with a member of your team about that email. And so I think if you look at that email, it actually it's not the opposite of what we said. But thank you for that. So as I included in the report, part of what I'm doing is assessing operations in the whole process. And the idea of the drivers program is a it's a valid program. It's a noble effort to assist our judges in getting their results back. But the truth of the matter is, if every judge says, I want you to pick up my results, I don't have 782 drivers. It's a program that's only as successful as the resources that we have to identify those drivers. So once we're assessing who's going to drive in, who's not going to drive in, then that gives us an idea of how many drivers do we actually need. So we do have drivers that are signing up, county employees who are signing up to work. And that from conversation with the parties, we know that some of not some of, but your GOP judges are saying they're going to drive in, regardless of where they are. So right away, we remove them out of the factor of needing a driver. Except that some of your judges have said, no, I don't want to drive in. I want you to pick us up. So in order to utilize a driver program, as we're seeking more eligible drivers, we then say, let's look at who's within 10 miles of NRG. Those are the first folks that are going to be able to deliver their results to us. They're less than 10 miles. They can be here within 30 minutes. There's 254 locations or so forth that are 10 miles, maybe 11 miles outside from NRG. So we'd like for those judges to drive in. They have the shortest drive. The judges that are in the farthest polling locations of Harris County, we've offered them a pickup. Well, you know what? You've worked 16, 18 hours. Don't worry about it. We'll come out and get your results unless you say you want to drive them in. And if you say you want to drive them in, we're going to strike you off the list and we're going to move on to the next location. So what we're communicating is who's driving in, who's not. And then once we hear that the GOP is not going to have a pickup, then it's a message to those judges that say, well, no, I don't want to drive in regardless. Well, then we have to still try to accommodate those folks. So they say, I'm not going to drive in. If I have to drive in, I'm not going to work. Well, I can't have that. I need you to work. So we start triaging. How many do we have that will drive in? How many do we have that can't drive in, that won't drive in? And how do we solve that? So when I look at the election code says that the judges are responsible for delivering their results, or they designate someone. So that several emails have said, if you're not going to drive in, designate someone. Yeah. You have the ability to do that by statute. So those are some of the communications that are going back and forth. And we're happy to talk through this just to make sure we're all on the same page.
So there was one I saw, and it may have been specific, you may be changing the date, but the emergency period for Election Day started yesterday. There was, I think that they said you had to know by October 13th. Obviously, I don't know if it was tied to their appointment, because we have people that are still being filled from both parties. I guess my question is, in my business, what's your drop dead date that we have to make sure they have let you know?
Yes.
And again, I think your team, Rochelle had said she'd put together a list for our party of who has said yes, they're doing it, who hasn't responded, and who has said no.
Yes, ma'am. So I think our initial date was just to get the fire started, because what we know will happen is the judges will let it slide. And then they'll say, my silence was consent. Well, consent to what? I need you to answer the question. Are you driving or not? And I don't want to sound crass. It's just, are you driving or not? And so the first date was, let us know where you are, which then allows us to assess where we are, and then allows us to figure out how many more drivers do we actually need to recruit. So that was the first date, but
So it wasn't a drop dead?
No, because
yeah.
we know that we know it's going to slide.
Okay,
And
I would
then-
assume that if you got it, the Thursday, Friday before pickup, or, if you'll let us know,
Yes,
we
ma'am.
just need to know,
Yes.
because we can help make
Yes,
sure
ma'am.
that they've complied.
Absolutely.
You brought up on our call this law enforcement task force, and I think you left our meeting to go to the meeting. It may have been the first. Can you elaborate? Because you said what you thought. I think I think what you were saying is said, this is how I think it's going to work, but I'm going to learn more. So can you share it with us?
Yes, ma'am. So for election security is a real thing, not only here in Harris County, but all of Texas and all of the nation. So what every jurisdiction does is they establish a legal task force. And that task force is designed to discuss what are some of the issues that we might see on election day. And based on what those issues are, how do we respond? And so what you don't want to have happen is an issue occurs and then no one takes charge of that issue. So the task force is designed to identify how we respond to any particular issue, whether it's elections related or not. And so the constables, the sheriff's office, the county attorney, and the county administrator and the election administrator's office, as well as the fire marshal, are all sitting down talking about what happens if there's an emergency situation at a location. What fire marshal, who's going to respond? What ambulance is going to respond? What hospital are they taking them to? So it's that kind of discussion, that sort of planning, just to make sure that we aren't caught flat-footed on election day.
Okay. Let me make sure. My last question, and it's not really, and maybe I'm sure I'm going to have more questions, Mr. Tatum, about this. We got it a little after 11. Unfortunately, I've been booked up like I think a lot of people. So I want to have my reading tonight. But this is Judge, maybe I missed it. I've done a search. I know we received in June preliminary results from and you cited here the Forest Marsh audit, but is there a final report? I mean,
Yes,
I didn't get it and I've done a search through every email and
I think we all received it because my office only received it yesterday, the 19th, and it was a report dated August. So I asked for clarification on that too, because we received the June or July one.
which was
Then-
preliminary.
Which was preliminary, and then we received the one last night. Why is it dated August? Do you know? I don't know if that's a question for Mr. Barry, because if it was August, why is it that we only now have received it?
Well, I'll fall on the sword and say that my office should have shared that Forest Marsh report with everyone. I received the final report in conjunction with the county administrator's office, oversight on my part that we didn't get you the report. But we will certainly send this report to everyone because I believe, and I will have to check with the county attorney, whether or not it's a public report. I think it is. So we will share that report. And my apologies for not.
Is it very different from the June, July report?
No, it is not. It is not. As it relates to recommendations and findings, it is not. The initial, as you recall, with any particular audit, there's always the opportunity for the entity that's being audited to be able to respond to the initial findings. And so as the first draft came out, we wrote back to clarify, I don't think you got that right. So the auditors then looked at their notes and said, yeah, that makes sense. So they made a few edits here and there, but the findings, I believe, remain the same.
But I do want to note, I mean, I wasn't interviewed and neither were my team members until August. And so it was like, I pulled it up. I think the email I had from him was, and what he was communicating, I think it was a he and she, it's been too many days since then. But that they had to have the final report by the end of August. And I guess it was my expectation that that report and the auditors would come in and be able to answer questions of the election commission. We can't do it now, but I think definitely after, I would like to have them come in and have the report judged so that we can really come prepared with our questions. And, and then we'll be able to see what's worked, what didn't, and I know you wouldn't have been able to implement everything, but I think, and, you were bringing up this morning, we were at an event about the need of having a follow-up,
Yes, well, I'll commit to posting that, and I do think it's important to do that. I think this meeting has been very helpful. I appreciate your making that recommendation, and I think it's important for you to have a forum to really put it out in long form. I mean, this can't happen in any press conference for us in the public to ask questions. Do you have any additional questions, Chair?
No,
Siegel?
that's it.
I have some questions and following up on a couple of the ones that Chair Siegel asked. Actually, I'm so sorry, Ms. Bennett, tax assessor, I forgot you're not here in person. What questions do you have? You're on mute.
I don't have any questions at this time.
Okay, got it. So I had the same question as Chair Siegel did on the machines. Is there, if a location, and I heard this also in past elections, if a location has machines sitting around and another location is unexpectedly busy, will you be able to be nimble in reassigning machines?
So what we've done is we've held a number of machines back in reserve to allow us to move untouched machines from one location to the next location. So in effect, we've held one machine back per vote center. So we have 782, maybe 800, or maybe a few more in case, God forbid, shouldn't happen. One machine goes down at every location. We have one machine to replace. That won't happen. So we know that as we see a run at any particular voting location, that we'd be able to add machines if necessary. Here's what we don't want to do is if on Tuesday, there's a run at location 30, and then we move machines from location 10 to 30, and then there's a run on 30 the next day, then I'm in the same boat. So what we do is we project where we see the runs, where the turnout is, which then we assign more machines based on where we think that turnout is going to be. And then the reserves, my warehouse manager won't like me for this, the reserves can be deployed as we see those runs occur, with the idea that we know we're going to have to hold machines back in case machines break down. And that's the same for the duos and for the scans.
So essentially, if a machine is seeing unexpectedly low turnout, they're just going to have some machines sitting around, but you have these 800 machines in storage to aid the other locations.
That's correct.
Related question, the wait time application or part of the website,
Yes.
is that up and running? Is it being tested for traffic as well?
Yes, the wait time app is functional. And the way it works is if a voter pulls up the website, they can hover their mouse over one of the dots on the map. They can actually type in their address and it'll show them the closest 50 locations to their address. They can hover over one of the dots, which will tell them what location that is. If they click on that location, it will then show them the expected wait time. So part of that question leads me to say, part of what our communication team is doing and part of what we've been asked is how do we direct voters from one location to the next location? If there's a long line at location number 30, can we send voters to location number 40? And that becomes a social media kind of communication. And the question then becomes, who are those voters that are standing in line? Are they on their social media? Are they going to see that message and then immediately?
Or, I know at some point, I think one of the workers or election judges mentioned, well, perhaps you could have someone walk the line and say, there's a location 2 blocks away or whatever it is. Now, I know some folks really like a certain location and these locations are always going to have a line and it is what it is. But to the extent that folks can do that. So it sounds like you're considering that.
Yes, ma'am.
Another question, if the positions are not all filled. I remember, I think in the primary, there was a point in which there were more open positions than there were available judges. And I believe the administrator at the time filled it with election workers. Anyway, where's the end game here?
Yeah, yes, ma'am. And I believe I understood that occurred as well. And so what I've asked our team to do is to over-recruit the number of judges, presiding judges and alternate judges that we have, so that we know that 10%, 5% of our judges are not going to be able to work on election day. And
The ones that have committed.
the ones that have committed, that's correct. And so in order to fill those gaps, we need to have people in reserve. So we're recruiting more judges than we need. We're training more judges than we need with the idea that we anticipate and know that we're going to put them into the flow.
And in a worst case scenario, do you have employees on standby?
We, as I understand it now, we actually have enough reserves to not have to send employees out. And here's the.
Right, I mean,
Yeah.
of course, we would,
Yeah,
we
yeah,
prefer
yeah.
to have the folks, but.
So we do have employees that we could deploy. Here's that burn, that redo factor that I spoke
Right.
to. So if we have to deploy employees to operate a vote center or even an election day vote center, then that's less hands that we have to process election results on election night. So that is truly the drop dead scenario. So to that end, if we have voters watching, sign up to be a judge, sign up to be a clerk, because we can use you. We can
Okay.
use you.
Yes, yeah.
So we've submitted over 3,000 names approximately. So would you come to the party? I mean, I don't want us to slow down the count because you're shifting, that's my personal preference, and shifting people to go work the election. But things happen. Kids get sick. You have to
Sure,
stay home with,
sure.
I even sent my husband to work the last, primary, which was an experience. But so would you go to the parties? I mean, if they're already on our nominated list, can the parties also have people that are sort of in reserve?
Well, I think so. If you have folks that are in reserve, absolutely. Give them to me. If you have them in reserve, we can use them in some way, shape, or form, whether it's in a presiding judge, alternate judge, or clerk position. We know we can use them. Then the next question becomes, are they willing to travel? How far away from home are they willing to go? That's a real thing, because if they don't want to drive across town, then they want to work, but they want to work where we want them to work. So that's a real
Yeah,
factor.
okay.
Clerk Hudson.
Yes, I know that you mentioned the wait time application. Is there also a ballot tracker application for the ballot by mail? I know it's something that was launched some time ago, and so do we still have that feature that lives on the website?
Yes, ma'am. The ballot tracker is still on the website.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I had another question in terms of the law enforcement and the pickup program. You all have come a very long way, because that sounds kind of like curbside service. Let me ask you, do we still have the law enforcement participation in terms of law enforcement helping to pick up results? Because I heard you say something about county employees.
Yes.
So do we do the outreach to the sheriffs and constables and all of our law enforcement to make sure that we could have all hands on deck from there as well?
Yes, we did reach out to the sheriff's office and to all the constables' offices, and we've actually had a number of constable offices tell us that they're not going to participate at all, meaning that they didn't provide one person,
Oh, wow.
which really puts us in a pinch. And we've had conversations with the county attorney and with the county administrator about how do we resolve that? I don't know that I could force a constable to provide us with some law enforcement, but we really need support from all the constables.
Yeah, that's a really significant piece of the process, especially with questions and people feeling uneasy on both sides of the aisle in terms of security measures. So that's really good to know, because that's a significant part of the process, is having that law enforcement support.
The sheriff has leaned in really heavy. Constable one has leaned in really heavy. And there's a few others. Forgive me I don't have that list here, but I can certainly share with you the list of constables that are not participating.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that insight. Yeah, because we really need to know that in terms of pickup, drop off. We need to have realistic pictures, and we all, in terms of the parties, now we're hearing it. So when it comes up, we can't beat up on our EA about something that we can't control. One other question in regards to the paper ballots, and the voter walking from printing their results to the box. Can you walk us through what is being done at the poll from the clerk standpoint to ensure that folks don't walk out with that paper and they go actually deposit the ballot in the ballot box?
Thank you for that. I think I forgot to include that. So on the Duo machine, we have added a paper guide. It's a device that was created by the vendor that, with the help of our staff, by the way, that will guide so each voter, when they show up at the polling location, will get 2 sheets of paper, 2 8.5 by 14 sheets of paper. And that's because the ballot is just that long. And their ballot code is created at the controller. They then step to a machine, and the machine asks them to activate it. They put their first piece of paper in, and they start making selections, and they have to go through 93 screens. And they can't skip from the 10th screen to the end. They have to go through every screen. And they don't have to cast a vote for every screen, but if you're there, you might as well cast a vote because you've got to go through that screen. So after they get to the last screen, they select cast ballot. The machine then processes itself, and excuse me, that's when it asks you to insert the sheet of paper. So the guide directs that sheet of paper, that first sheet, into the machine in the fashion so that it doesn't print in a crooked sort of way, which then will allow it to read through the scanner properly. And so after it prints the first ballot page of the paper, there's a flag that pops up that says, ready for your next ballot. And they insert the second page, does the same thing. It prints itself, flag pops up, you've completed your vote. We then take the page, pick 2 pieces of paper, and we walk over to the scanner. And there's signage at the scanner that says, feed 1 page at a time. So the presiding judge and the alternate judge are sort of working their way around the polling location itself. And there's a ballot clerk. So we're training our ballot clerk to advise the voter 1 sheet at a time, which should prevent that ballot jam. Now, if they attempt to read 2 at a time, then we'll see what we get. But we have technicians out in the field too that can respond if necessary.
I do think that part of the problem is the world we live in today, and this is what I've told people who complain. We're all used to the high-speed scanners now.
Yeah.
And those machines are not a high-speed scanner.
No, they are not a high-speed scanner. I believe it's described as an optiplex reader. And it's taking an image of the full page itself and then reading the results, as opposed to some machines will read the ovals, the lines that correspond to the ovals. It's not that. It's an imaging machine. So it's not a high-speed scanner.
Yeah, I just think there's a mental, myself included, that we're used to, high-speed printers, high-speed scanners,
Yes.
And so just as a follow-up to that, once they have printed their results on there, there's a clerk that reminds them, you're not done yet.
Yeah, that's correct.
You've got to go over here and deposit that. So just one other follow-up question. I promise this is the last one. Has there been anything submitted in writing, i.e. to Commissioners Court or the media, in regards to voting the full ballot? Is there something in the mail ballots, or because there are folks voting already, that I heard you say, there's no way you can kind of skip through places. You've got to kind of go through each race, and you can choose not to. And so has there been any communication within the outreach plan? I see there's a robust outreach plan where there are community events that the training is going on. And one thing I hear at least 5 to 6 times a day is vote the entire ballot. I don't care if it's talking to someone or listening to other candidates. And so is there anything that you all are adding maybe to the website or in any of your publications that talks about, take your time, vote the entire ballot?
Yes. So our outreach team is actually out in the field with sample ballots, and we're messaging for voters to actually go to the website and generate their sample ballot. They can create a sample ballot, which will be on paper directly, specifically for their address, which shows all of their contests that will be on their ballot. And they can actually walk in with that paper and use it to vote on the touchscreen. Now, they can't use their phone in the polling location, so they have to print the paper. But to your point, the outreach teams are out saying just that. It's a long ballot. We haven't written to the court just yet, but what I intended to do was the report that I submitted to you all, I'm going to mail going to forward to the Commissioners Court so that they have a copy of what we have here. And I'm going to say to them that it's a long ballot.
Okay. Is that included in the media and outreach plan? I know that it says here there's some print, radio, broadcast, digital. Is that that message included in some
Yes.
of this publication?
So one of the things that we have to balance is if we tell them it's going to take too long, then they won't turn out. So we balance the message because we want everyone to turn out. So we tell them to come prepared, come ready, come prepared, know who you're voting for. There'll be a line, but be prepared. And that's what we're communicating. And for out in the field, they get to touch it and see it.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I have one question as well, which is about resources. So the Forest Marsh report noted this, that the administrator at times said she was lacking resources. And I remember I called her after the issues arose after the primary, and she said, well, I needed this and this and that. And I said, well, you know, we had several meetings of Commissioners Court, at least one, where I asked, what more do you need? And you said you were fine. And the report points this out, that, you know, she never really expressed that she needed what more she needed. She said, well, I didn't realize that you meant for me to say that openly. And so I'm a very straight shooter, EA Tatum. So I don't want to make this same miscommunication twice. Is there anything else that you need now? You made clear, right now we have so many machines. You came in within a month and a half, we couldn't have gotten any more. There's some long-term changes you'd like to make, which you couldn't make in a month and a half. But the things that can be delivered,
Yes.
is there anything that you're missing?
So for this November election, we have what we need to get through this election. And I've been working with the county administrator, and we've identified funds that will get us through November. So part of my concern that I've expressed to the administrator is based on the budget as it was developed. And of course, that was before we got the budget that we got. That there was concern that if we are not reimbursed by all of the entities that we're conducting this election for, would we have enough funds to conduct the December runoff and the next May 2023 election? And if we saw that there wasn't enough funds in the budget that was allocated, how do I come back to the court to ask for more money? Because I understand the way the budget formula was developed, and I appreciate where they are. And as I said to them, I can play in that sandbox because I understand what you're doing and how it works. But I need the mechanism to come back if in fact this turns out not to be enough funding. So I am not shy in asking for the funds that we need. So the existing budget that we are currently operating under freezes or eliminates from our administration side at least $1 million. And as a result of that, we have actually frozen 12 FTE positions. And that's a real thing for us. So we're short 12 full-time employees that we could plug into this process. And so, but what that means is, as I walked in, those 12 were already empty. So we wouldn't go into a hiring frenzy in the last 60 days. But under this existing budget, we're frozen. Those positions are frozen. And as I understand the process, if we roll through the budget cycle with these positions frozen, then we're likely to forfeit these positions, which would be a killer for us. That would kill us. And we currently have a few vacancies from folks that have resigned and moved on to green pastures. And we're always encourage folks, if they have better opportunities, to go for better opportunities. So there's at least 2 positions, maybe 3 there that aren't in this frozen section, but we need to hire them. And so then when you talk about election operations as a whole, we are skin deep, meaning that we have one point of failure. maybe 2. So what we always do is we cross-train so that any one particular employee in the office can do another person's job if necessary, just as a placeholder, but not to take on another person's total responsibility. So filling gaps is what we do, but we have to have the resources to fill the gaps.
Yeah, and I'm glad to hear that you're not shy about that, and, you know, we're continuing to do everything we can to see if we can get that budget passed on the 25th, so you don't end up in this situation,
Yes.
which would be problematic for everyone. Yes,
That was going to be my question. Is there no emergency type of situation that we can help assist in this? Because I know for sure him giving that 12, list of 12, that is not good.
well, it's a numbers, right? A numbers game, and we're in a situation where the hospital system would be at $45 million in the red. The law enforcement would receive 100 million. You're saying you'd have 12 fewer positions that you were going to need. So, you know, the biggest thing is for folks to remind anyone who lives in precincts 3 and 4 that the lack of participation in the budget process has very real implications for both parties. And so it's another point to bring up. And the way to address this is if Commissioners Cagle and Ramsey or either one of them participates in our meeting on Tuesday. There are 2 meetings. The one that pertains to elections is the first one, which is scheduled for 10 a.m. And we need a quorum of 4 people. I have just a comment, Mr. Tatum. Oh, yes, go ahead.
I actually have a question about that. You just said something about having, so this emergency period that we're in where we submit new names for election workers, does that hamper our ability to actually submit names to now work the polls?
No, if I'm hearing Mr. Tatum correctly, he was never going to use those 12 positions for this election.
That's correct.
Because he couldn't recruit them fast enough.
Okay.
However, it's going to be a problem going forward.
Right, going forward.
Yeah.
So we still need to, okay.
Yeah,
still a
I
deficit.
need you to
Yeah.
still submit names.
Right.
Emergency placement period, which means I can place anybody.
Body anywhere, right?
But we're asking you if you have names, send us names, and we'll work off of those lists to get people appointed. And so to your question, if the court, once we get into that emergency period, we don't need those people approved by the court.
Okay, okay.
Chair Siegel.
Yeah, just following your question about staffing. In the March primary, Otis and I both were on a call and our staffs with the EA's office and EA. And the comment, as you recall, was like that Sunday was, it's going to take 500 more hours to complete the count. There'd be no way to get it done. And both parties said that and I offer this, and I'm sure you would do the same, our early voting ballot board, you know, if you need help with the count. And so like the judge, I want to make sure that the count as quickly as and accurately as you can count the size of Harris County, but I think we've got those resources. I want to make sure that we're staffed at central count that we can get the job.
Thank you for
can get the
that.
job done.
So to date, we've received, I don't have the official count, but I'm sure it's roughly 10,000 voted ballots returned back to us, 10, 12,000, somewhere in that area. So SVC is actually working, Signature Verification Committee is actually working now reviewing those signatures. And as I understand it, the early voting ballot board actually has staff waiting for us to bring them in when there's something to do. So, but yes, we, as I see, we need more help. I am not shy in asking for more help. And I've said that, I say that to my team every day. What do you need? What do you need? Let's move some folks around to do, tell me what you need and I'll get what you need. And if I don't have it, I'm going to ask.
Well, and I think you plan for the worst, hope for the best.
Absolutely.
But can I add one more? And I promise this will be the last. I was being told after the March primary, and again, we hope we never have to go through that again, but that there were issues with both parties. The presiding judges weren't returning the ballot bag, ballot box. And they evidently, the EA's office had sent out an email to them, but given that they don't have their laptops or aren't supposed to be checking their emails, how are you going to communicate if something does happen? And then I would also ask, and I know you guys are going to be under the crunch, but, you know, I think both parties, if we're aware to, you know, and I'm not asking you to put us at the top of the call list, but I think if we know that there are issues, you know, we can step in and hopefully help.
No, I am asking we be on top of that call list because,
Yeah.
as you know,
Well, I'm not the
we get
first.
those calls. We get those calls first. I mean, the reality is we get those calls
Yeah.
first. They don't go anywhere else. They call the party and assume that we are the ones doing that. So
And Otis and I both were surprised when the announcement was made to the media about the 10,000
Yes,
missing
yeah.
ballots had been discovered, or, you know, and we were both calling each other saying, did you know it? No, neither one of us knew.
So we communicate to our judges through our e-poll book solution. So we actually send out messages throughout the day. But your point is made. At some point, you don't want to over communicate so that they're not paying attention. But that is part of what we focused on, is in reminding the judges what it is they need to bring back
Yeah.
on election night. So the point is made, and we'll make sure that we get that communicated to them.
Judge, I have a question for Mr. Tatum.
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Tatum, this is Ann Harris Bennett of the tax office. My question is, it relates to the call center. I'm sure you've got a call center. Do you feel satisfied that you have enough people in that center to take the phone calls that are going to come? And the other part of that question is, I understand that there is a queuing system. Is that queuing system set up high enough that those calls that are not being answered are not going to fall off the side of the earth to the point that citizens start to create all types of reasons why their calls aren't being answered?
Thank you for the question, ma'am. Yes, I actually requested and received a call center plan so that I know exactly what the layout is for call center. And as you know, we use the call center term sort of in multiple ways. There's different levels of call center. There's the help desk that the judges will call as it relates to election equipment issues. And then there's the public call center piece where we have the public calling in with questions about the voting process, about their registration status, about their absentee ballot status, about elections questions in general. And what is currently happening is that call, as you hit the tree, you make a selection to get to a particular department to ask that question. And what we've done is we've caused that queue to roll over to multiple lines so that we have multiple people eating on the queue at any one particular time, so that we don't have 10, 15, 20 people standing or waiting on the call for someone to pick up the call. But you raise a point that I'll verify and confirm is what is the queuing plateau? Because that's part of the Universal Services support to us, is we want to ensure that if there are 30 calls, God forbid, waiting, that those calls don't drop off. And I've actually asked, the plan identifies how many people we'll actually have in the seats answering the call. And I've directed the team to let's hunt for bear. So get as many as you can, get as many as you need. Let's not be short. Let's have more than we need. If we don't need them, okay, but we're worse off if we need them and don't have them.
Would you have to, or would you need to have backups, say from county employees, just in case? Because I don't think any of us really know how this election is going to turn out. We're looking at what, 65% turnout?
Yes, ma'am.
Let's suppose it's more than that. I don't want us to find ourselves being overwhelmed. I always seem to plan for the worst and hope for the best.
Thank you for that. And we actually did have conversation with the county administrator about whether we could tap in I think it was Universal Services, whether we could tap into 311. But your point is made, and I've made a note of that, and I will certainly follow up with that.
Thank you.
Mr. Clifford, thank you. Thank you to your staff. I know you guys have been working incredibly hard. Your depth of knowledge is evident and how hard you've worked to implement the necessary changes. And I know that's not just you, it's your entire team.
Exactly.
I'll save additional commendation for after the election has been successfully run. And just know, I know there are many challenges. Some you can control, some you cannot. But the charge I think that you're very aware of is to run the most secure, efficient election. And I know you take that very seriously. And I want to echo that to our Universal Services Department. I know they've been working hard as well, but we're counting on them to make sure that this election is run smoothly, that the website is secure and efficient. And I hope that, and I trust that come election day, we will just have an additional set of smiles for all of you and for the team. So thank you so much. Godspeed in running this, and let us know if you have any additional needs.
Thank you, Judge. Thank you.
All right, thank you, colleagues. It's no action, Lucinda, on this item. It didn't have any action items. I'll work, colleagues, on convening a meeting after the election. It's 2:38, and this meeting is now adjourned.
Okay, so I'm gonna reserve this and not give you all of my thoughts because I want people to watch this and to think for themselves. I have my list of concerns, and I'm sure everyone who sees this will also have their list. So it's been a long one, so I'm just going to say God always wins. We're in good hands. I love you. Be blessed. And thank you as always for joining me. See you soon.